Welcome to the Bulwark Podcast. I'm Charlie Sykes. I want to thank Amanda Carpenter and Will Salatin for sitting in for me yesterday. I appreciate it very much. We're doing summer hours, so I'm taking Mondays off. I think 4 podcasts plus a secret podcast plus the newsletters is enough. But the news cycle is not taking a breather. And as we speak, the January 6th committee is prepared to hold another public hearing. We don't know what the Supreme Court is going to be doing over the next several weeks. But let's just dive into everything that is going on. So we are very fortunate to be joined by former Congressman Denver Riggleman, who until recently was a top staffer of the January 6th committee. So welcome back to the podcast, Denver.
Thanks for having me, Charlie.
So before we dive into all of this, we have to talk about a few things, okay? Because you and I have been through a similar experience over the last several weeks. We both lost our best buddies, our companions. My dog Pete died at 17 and a half, and you lost a puppy as well, didn't you?
I lost 2 Samoyeds this year.
2
one was
in
11.
1 year.
Yes. Yeah, one was 11 and a half, one was 12 and a half or 12 and a quarter, But within 10 months, they were half brothers. They were about 5 days apart. And they both contracted diabetes about the same time, 2 years before. And then, then they died and we lost both of the Samoyeds. And I saw, your poor dog, man, Pete.
Yeah.
That's just so sad.
Well, not
So
poor. I
sad.
mean, he lived a good life, and I look back on that and think of all the bonus years that he got. But I guess the point is that the world is divided into 2 kinds of people: the kinds of people that get this conversation we're having now, and the ones who don't. That it's a loss in the family, and I know there are people out there going, it's just a pet. But when you've experienced it, it's not. And so that's why I wanted to, because I know that it was painful for you, and you went out and got a new dog, though, right?
I did. We got a new Australian Shepherd.
Congratulations on that. I think we're going to hold off on getting dog number 3. All right, so we have a lot to talk about today, including your work on the January 6th committee. It is interesting. I'm sure that you saw this, that Donald Trump is clearly a little bit concerned about what's going on. I mean, last week he asked for equal time. This week he's having apparently some second thoughts about the political genius of Kevin McCarthy. There's a lot of, buzz on the right, that there's nothing to see here. But he gave an interview to this far-right host, Dwayne Allen Root, who's way, way out there. And he's ripping McCarthy for not putting his defenders on the panel. He's experiencing a little bit of, yearning for, I need a little bit of Matt Gaetz and Jim Jordan. Somebody's going to shill for me. He said, unfortunately, a bad decision was made. This committee, it was a bad decision not to have representation on that committee. This was a very, very foolish decision because they try to pretend they're legit. And he goes on, this is just a one-sided witch hunt. So I don't know. Denver, this strikes me as a tell that he's paying a lot of attention to what's going on in the committee, and he's realizing this is not good for him, which is kind of a different look from Donald Trump, who's always, hey, it's nothing to worry about here. What do you think?
Well, I tell you, when he'd said that, there's a couple of things that are happening. He's signaling that maybe McCarthy isn't really his choice for speaker anymore, which going to be very interesting if it comes to that. I think the second thing, too, is that the evidence has been so damning, especially from Republican individuals, that I think he's having a bit of a moment. And, not having people on the committee, there's something in the intelligence world called intel gain loss, or IGL, Charlie. Mm-hmm. And you always want to have access to the information. And if you throw a temper tantrum and you no longer want access, or you think you're making some kind of political statement, what happens is you lose access to that information. So instead of them having any ability to see where the committee is going, to have equal access, to be able to message around what the committee's trying to do, instead they're in the dark. They don't know what's coming tomorrow. Today. They have no idea. They have to buckle in, right? They have to snap in and hope that they can actually survive this ride. However, Charlie, as you know, there's not a whole lot of people on the Republican side watching this. And I think that is a problem. I think the last poll was about 1 in 5 Republicans are interested in the hearings. But again, as far as a fact-finding mission, I think Donald Trump is aware that this evidence doesn't look great for him.
On the other hand, I keep flashing back to the you can't handle the truth moment where, if you listen to Trump, he's basically saying, yeah, I did it and I'm glad I did it. Right. I mean, he has over and over again reiterated the fact that, yes, he wanted to overturn the election. Yes, he conspired to get the election thrown out, that he was pressuring Mike Pence to do all of this, that he supported the demonstrators on January 6th. So, I mean, there's a little bit of a disconnect that there's no mystery here. We're not like solving, was there a crime and did he commit a crime? He's saying, yeah, damn right I committed it, and I'm likely to do it again.
I think we've established that Donald Trump still thinks the election was fraudulent, regardless of the facts. I think what's more important to me, I look at this maybe a little bit differently, even in the committee, which they've done a fantastic job, with interviews and things like that. What I want to know, and what I was really interested in, and what I helped the committee with, was how did the actual coordination work from the top down, right? What was the commander's intent? What was the intent of what these individuals were doing? And then did they communicate? Did they coordinate across multiple layers or levels, to perpetuate a fraud, or to, in some instances, I would say, to utilize this fraud to make a tremendous amount of money? So those are the kind of things that I'm very interested in, is how do we stop this in the future, and how did that structure look? What was that sort of linkage that you saw at each level that allowed them to get to the state legislators, like you're talking about today, but also allowed them to push this message out into the sort of the disinformation ecosystem around Stop the Steal?
Yeah, let me just play a little bit of a soundbite. You were on CNN last week explaining the attack on the Capitol is really a terrorism investigation. And this is what you had to say on CNN last week.
When you look at how, the coordination happened, when you look at the other groups that are involved, the committee hasn't gotten to the rally planners yet. The committee hasn't gotten to the people on the ground yet, the day of. The committee hasn't talked about the state legislators yet a lot, right? They've mentioned the alternate electors. There's still multiple groups. The committee has just touched the surface in these first 3 hearings. I think the next 3 hearings is going to build on this. And this is a terrorism problem. It's a coordination problem. But it's also us looking at what we call the techniques, tactics, and procedures, or the TTPs of these groups, and actually digging into how they were able to do this.
So this is interesting because there's really 2 separate investigations that are going on, right? I mean, the actual events of January 6th, which were really a terrorist attack on the Capitol, and then you have the larger plot by Donald Trump to overturn the election. And the job of the committee is somehow to weave all of that together, right? I mean, to connect all of the dots, that you had this terrorist attack, you have this massive grift, but you also had this very concerted attempt to pressure state officials to use use the legislatures to overturn the popular vote. So the committee has a very wide remit, doesn't it, Denver?
It does, and that's what makes it such a challenge, for the committee, is to sort of engage the American public and how many different groups were involved, but also that you're right, there's sort of 2 different paths here. There's the intent, or what Trump and his inner circle knew, or what they knew about the coordination. But then if you drop down a layer, there's that really important sort of 2nd, 3rd, and 4th tier about how that coordination happened across, those states, whether it was legislators or activists or fundraisers or messaging. All of those things are very, very important, because if you're looking at a sort of a domestic terrorism problem, your baseline really is, Charlie, the radicalization pipeline. And if people are pushing lies into this sphere, and individuals are reacting to that based on money being pushed that way, or algorithmic targeting, that is really important for the American public to know. So yes, we can talk about Donald Trump here, but there's a larger problem in the future, is that social media and interconnectivity, and I would say encrypted apps, the ability to really enhance your command and control through social media, or through digital preparation of the battle space, is what I would call it in a military term, is really, really interesting. And if we don't get our arms around that also, we can talk about somebody like Trump and those people who had really no moral compass and wanted to grift their way back to the presidency. But on the other hand, how many other people were involved that sort of took the ball and ran with it and were able to coordinate in a way that almost looked like military coordination?
Well, let's take a step back from all of this because I agree with everything you're talking about. I mean, we're trying to find out, how this plot spread and the radicalization that's going on here. We're at a moment now where it feels as if we're getting very close to normalizing the idea of political violence, that it's become more and more frequent. And this may sound like a digression, but I wanted to just bounce this off of you. This extraordinary ad by the leading Republican candidate for U.S. Senate in Missouri, Eric Greitens, who basically is talking about political murder. And just a little bit of background on all of this. Eric Greitens, I mean, this is an extraordinary story. I mean, talk about a guy who is testing the limits of post-shame politics. Eric Greitens was forced to resign as governor in disgrace after a series of scandals, including a sex scandal and allegations that he tied a woman up in his basement and took pictures of her, and yet somehow he is, I don't, without shame, and he is leading in the polls, and he's really angling for Donald Trump's endorsement. But he puts out an ad in which he shows himself, armed with a rifle and a SWAT team, targeting rhinos, Republicans in name only. Let's just play the audio of this because there's no other way to really summarize what the leading Republican candidate for United States Senate in Missouri is doing. And no euphemisms here. He's talking about killing his political enemies. Here, let's play it.
I'm Eric Greitens, Navy SEAL, and today we're going rhino hunting. The rhino feeds on corruption and is marked by the stripes of cowardice. Join the MAGA crew. Get a rhino hunting permit. There's no bagging limit, no tagging limit, and it doesn't expire until we save our country.
Jesus. So, Denver, here we have a candidate for the United States Senate who's talking about killing. I mean, there's no euphemisms here. I'm talking about killing his political opponents, and apparently thinks that this is going to appeal to this radicalized Republican base. So, it's one thing to have these extremist groups on these encrypted apps, talking about what they're planning on doing, but they're just taking the mask off and going, yeah, we're embracing this kind of violent subculture. So talk to me about this, because this seems to be one of the legacies of January 6th is kind of the embrace of political violence, or at least the normalization of it.
I think it's almost as if they're polling on this right now, Charlie. I think they probably put out some type of poll where it says he might have been weak on the Second Amendment, or maybe, they still thought of him as a rhino, or there's something that happened there, where that there's some consultant with Eric Greitens who thought it would be a great idea to, utilize weapons, right, to use some door kickers to go say that they need to go bag some rhinos. And I'm not quite sure what goes through your head, but I don't think Greitens probably has a very good judgment meter anyway, and he's a criminal who's done some heinous things, right, or been accused of some heinous things. It seems to me, though, that this normalization of violence, or this normalization of this machismo or whatever, has gone to the point that any LARPer, any live action role player out there who's part of MEAL Team 6, right? These guys who dress up for pretend, right, is who he's trying to appeal to. It's the guys who buy a whip antenna for their 2003 Ford Taurus and tell people they're Secret Service, right? But those people can actually pull the trigger. All you need is a finger and a weapon, and some rounds. And that's what scares me about these type of ads, is that they're just unhinged. They come from a place of deep disturbance and, almost a mental disease of individuals who need to lean forward to say that, they're the toughest out there, or the gun culture is for them, or the simple fact that people who are rhinos or Democrats or independents, anybody who doesn't agree with them needs to be eliminated for this to be the one true free country. And I think that's a real problem.
Yeah, people are scratching their heads about, what is his intent here? Is it simply to distract from all of his other scandals, to get people talking about all of this? Look, I know that, some right-wing folks will brush this off as trolling for the lulz, or maybe it's a sign that, Greitens will fight, and Ella Pundit had an interesting analysis. He said, essentially, Greitens is weaponizing his own immorality, but it might actually work. And he writes, he doesn't mince any words. He said, Greitens' fascist ad is a signal to some of these voters that essentially says, I may be a scumbag, but I'll use my scumminess to punish your enemies, which is kind of also the Trump bargain with Republican voters in a nutshell, right?
That's so funny you said that, Charlie. I might be a scumbag, but I'm your scumbag. And,
that's right. And I'll fight
right.
dirty on your behalf.
That's exactly right. And I think people, listen, if the ends always justify the means, if you're appealing to a crowd who believes in some hysterical conspiracy theories, or that globalists are trying to take your guns, or globalists try to steal the election, or globalists created COVID, or Bill Gates funded COVID, right? Or ballots are being burned, in white vans, or there's truckloads, there's dumpster loads of ballots. As Giuliani changed the story the other day. All this stuff is sort of a hysterical belief system that they are fighting good against evil. And Greitens is simply messaging to those individuals that, hey, look, I'm here to help you fight against evil. Regardless of who I am, I'm that guy. And I think it's going to get him some votes, Charlie. I actually think his polls will go up a bit, because of this ad.
Well, it'll be interesting to see what other Republicans say about this. I mean, there was once a time not that long ago when if somebody, did something that was regarded as completely offensive, that other Republicans would distance themselves from it. I don't know that that's going to happen. I know that, other Missouri Republicans have pushed back on this, but nationally, will he be treated like a pariah? I would say highly unlikely.
Highly unlikely. Who Marjorie Taylor Greene going to come out against this ad? Matt Gaetz. I mean, any of these, sort of, far right mouth breathers, are they going to come out and say that this is wrong? And the other thing too, which is really interesting about this, is that the Missouri Fraternal Order of Police came out against this ad, which was so the FOP came out against the ad, because it's really heinous. And here's the thing about on the Republican side, I think. Did Greitens forget about the Scalise shooting? And I think when you're pushing violence like this, when it's not even innuendo anymore, right? You would think somebody like a Steve Scalise would come out and say, listen, I might be a Second Amendment supporter, but anybody who's trying to incite political violence needs to remember the baseball game not too long ago where I was shot and almost killed. And I think that's something that Republicans need to remember, is that violence can go both ways. And when you look at far right violence, the biggest indicator of far right violence is far left violence. The biggest indicator of far left violence is far right violence. So people do react to this, and that's in the data. And that's what scares me, is that when you see people like this on the far right acting like this, does this sort of weaponize certain other fringe elements to say, listen, we have to respond in kind, and that's when you get into real trouble.
Well, I mean, we had the case of the guy that traveled from California to Brett Kavanaugh's house.
Exactly right.
And, he was obviously on the left. So in my newsletter today, I quoted a tweet from Nicholas Grossman, who writes for Arc Digital, who said, if America descends into instability and political violence, as many fear, a sitting governor and U.S. Senate candidate a former governor, putting out an ad featuring images of paramilitary raids against members of his party he considers insufficiently loyal will turn out to be many of the signs along the way. And I'm sorry, put this in the context of the shootings that have taken place, the violence, the utter shamelessness when the country is still wrestling with what happened in Texas, what happened in Buffalo. And then, of course, we're hearing from your former colleague, Adam Kinzinger, who, received a death threat notice aimed not at him alone, but at his wife and his child. And he posted, he said to his wife, I won't even read it here, but it talks about, names his little child by name, objects to the fact that they named the child Christian, refers to her by an obscenity, talks about executing Adam Kinzinger, but don't worry, you and Christian will be joining Adam in hell too. It's like you would think there would be a moment where people would go, all right, this is dangerous on both sides. Both sides are at risk if this gets out of hand, and that doesn't seem to be happening.
No, it doesn't. And, we can, the issue about fringe violence, and I'll tell you right now, the far right seems to be in a hold my beer moment with this, but, especially when you look at the Greitens ad and things like that. But when you look at what happened to Brett Kavanaugh, when you look at some of these other things, if we open that door, we continue to open it wider, right? First, it's a crack, right? Then it's a couple inches wide. And then all of a sudden you have a 1 foot wide crack in that door. People are going to go through that door, especially if they believe there's a good against evil fight going on, regardless of where you're at. And I think that's my fear, is that are we willing as a society to say, hey, we need to identify, what's going on, not only through social media, but through public statements, through ads, are we willing to identify, what these threats are, regardless, of what people might say? Hey, Greitens is it's his First Amendment right. It is.
Yeah,
it is. It actually is. However, it's my First Amendment right to call you a blooming asshole. Right. I can, I can do that. And I think that's what people need to do is the First Amendment's a very strong thing. And I think, Charlie, I would say people like me and you, we're using our First Amendment rights to say these guys who are speaking this way are wrong. They're out of school, but they also could create a violent sort of pattern. And when you see what happens to Adam, I'm so angry for the guy. Adam's I'm a former Air Force guy, but we're both Air Force blood. And, that's really what it comes down to is I see a brother in arms whose family is being attacked by crazy people. And I want to help them.
You've heard me talk about how important it is to have a VPN to protect your online privacy, but choosing a VPN you trust is equally as important. Now, I like to do research on my sponsors, and I only recommend brands to my listeners that I believe in. And I can say with full confidence that ExpressVPN is the best VPN in the market today. And I use it. Here's why. Number one, ExpressVPN does not log your activity online. Lots of cheaper free VPNs make money by selling your data to advertisers. Did you know that? But ExpressVPN doesn't do this. They even developed a technology trusted server that makes their VPN servers incapable of storing any data at all. Number two, speed. ExpressVPN now uses Lightway, a new VPN protocol they engineered to make user speeds faster than ever. I've tried a lot of VPNs in the past, and they can sometimes slow my connection, but ExpressVPN is always blazing fast and lets me stream videos at HD quality with zero buffering. The last thing, though, that really sets ExpressVPN apart is just how easy it is to use. You don't need any technical skills to get set up. Just fire up the app and tap one button to connect. That's it. Even your grandparents could do it. And it's not just me saying this. Business Insider, The Verge, and many other tech journals rate ExpressVPN the number one VPN in the world. So protect yourself with the VPN that I use and trust. Use my link, expressvpn.com/bulwark today, and get an extra 3 months free on a 1-year package. That's expressvpn.com/bulwark. Visit expressvpn.com/bulwark to learn more. Let's circle back to what's going on with the January 6th committee, because you were so deeply involved in this. So you were on MSNBC over the weekend and had some interesting comments about one of the aspects of the plots, the conspiracies that we're seeing, the massive scope of the grift surrounding stealing the election. Let's just play a little bit of that.
Stop the Steal just isn't a conspiracy theory, it's a brand. So you have individuals, members that are raising money on that type of hyperbole and outrage. You have the RNC, the NSRC, the NRCC. You have individuals that are using Stop the Steal, outrageous language and hyperbole to raise money. So when you're talking about $250 million, I do believe that's the floor. I think follow the money might be the most important, part of the investigation for the committee. They have a very talented team there. And when you see at the end of this, whether it's the report, whether they get to in the hearing, Stephanie, I think just the amount of money that flows through this grift, and I think it's the largest conspiratorial grift in the history of the United States. When you see the money that flows through this grift, when you see the team's investigation and how the committee puts it together, I think the country will realize, right, that you're on the edge of a very big fraud here of the American people. And when they pass around that digital collection plate, whether it's through email fundraising, whether it's through hard mailers, whether it's through digital, all of this is really based on some of the most bizarre conspiracy theories we've ever seen with foreign interference. And again, that should concern the American public.
As you mentioned before, the American public, should understand that they're being scammed here. But, as you mentioned in a newspaper interview recently, you're talking about deprogramming a large portion of the population. I'm just fascinated, though, by the fact that the evidence is overwhelming that Trump world is scamming its own people, that they regard their own folks as gullible rubes, and that doesn't seem to bother them. Again, I'm not going to say it's a side issue, but it's certainly one of the most extraordinary aspects of this that I think people look back and go, how did you not recognize what this was really all about?
Well, I don't want to get in too much trouble here. So here's the deal. I think there's a significant portion of our nation that are marks. They really are. But I think part of it too is that the individuals that are, and some of them I know, right? I've lost friends and family to this, is they do believe there's an apocalyptic issue here, right? That this is a good against evil and that Trump is an imperfect vessel to sort of satisfy a perfect mission. And that perfect mission is, ordained from on high. And I believe if you have people that are passing around, like that's why I call it the digital collection plate. If you have people passing that around, these individuals are willing to give if they think that their country's at stake. And sadly, they've been radicalized through multiple channels. I mean, this stuff has been mainlined into their frontal lobes, whether it's through them choosing whatever echo chamber on social media they want to look at, through fundraising, through TV, through RSBN, through OAN, or through weird stuff on Newsmax. All this stuff is them just sort of swimming in their own, echo chamber of, sort of disinformation filth, and they're enjoying it. And I think if they think that our country's, about to be taken over by globalists, which is just another term for Satanists or for Jewish individuals, it's so anti-Semitic. If they think that's the issue, Charlie, they're going to give money. Yeah. I mean, I don't know what else to tell people. Like they think this is a good against evil battle. We're at the beginning of the Great Tribulation.
So how is the committee doing? Give me your thumbnail reviews of the first 3 hearings. You and I are speaking the day of. We haven't heard what they're going to be doing today, and it's going to be, I think, interesting. Brad Raffensperger, Gabe Sterling, the Speaker of the Arizona House of Representatives, is going to be speaking. So, where are we in the cycle of painting the picture, connecting the dots?
I think when you see how they started the first hearing, Charlie, where they sort of baselined it with the timeline of the video, you can go back to that first hearing and see how they're building the case of what happened as far as radicalization all the way up to the day of. And even a little bit afterwards, right, as they continued that grift with the money. When you saw, Amanda Wick from the Green Team talk about the $250 million, they're talking about, that grift that happened even afterwards, right? There's grift that continues after the $250 million. So it's going to be really interesting to see how they continue to build on that baseline. When you talk about the last 3 hearings, if people are paying attention, which we know not everybody,
right.
Not everybody's paying attention. If people are paying attention, they're seeing that there's a directed effort to overturn the election through multiple channels. And that's why they split the committee up into their investigative teams. So you've already seen Follow the Money, but you've also seen, some of the stuff around Trump, right? Those individuals that talked around Trump, some of his attorneys. You've seen also sort of the first beginnings of domestic violent extremism, right? The radicalization path and how these people were actually radicalized. And now you're getting into alternate electors. You're getting into, how these individuals, were not only raising money off this, but how they were pushing state legislators to send alternate electors, right, so that they could overturn the election. So you're seeing them build up the case to where my belief is in the last hearing, they're going to sort of have a summary that sort of refers back to the first hearing. So like I've told people, they're going to tell you what they're going to tell you, the first hearing. Then they're going to tell you, which is hearings, 2 through 5, and then they're going to tell you what they told you. And that's really a military briefing. They're setting this up almost as sort of looking at a course of action or looking at sort of an after action report on what happened during a terrorism event. And I think they're being very effective in that.
So you gave a newspaper interview recently where you said that you're not as confident in the short term that it will be as explosive as we'd like it to be.
Correct.
So talk to me about that.
Sure. I think this is a long fuse bombshell, but not short term. I will stand by that because I think there's a significant portion of the population that are ignoring this or listening to alternate news sources. So I think what I told individuals this, and here it is, Charlie. Are you ready? I hope you're ready for this. I believe the committee is going to be successful if they can change between 3 and 5% of registered voters' minds about what happened on January 6th. So here's what we have. If you're talking about, how many people voted? 150 million, 155 million. So say we had 155 million voting. My hope is, and this is maybe if 3 to 5 million people, 3 to 7 million people, as far as registered voters are like, isn't that interesting? Isn't that something? Maybe it's a center-right independent, Charlie. Maybe it's somebody right down the middle. Maybe it's even somebody on the far right. They say, you know what? Maybe our institutions are more important than this individual who pushed something that was obviously a falsehood. Maybe I don't vote for these guys. Maybe these people are lying to me. Maybe the fact that I've sent a lot of money in on this Stop the Steal nonsense, looks to me like a little bit of a fraud. What if, Charlie, we can do a 3 to 5%, turn of event that would change the elections. That would change the direction, of the Republican Party a little bit. But right now, I don't know if the Republican Party can be saved right now, but I do think if we can change the minds of 3 to 5% people over the next year or two, as they look at the evidence, as they revisit it, I think that is a success. But as far as some short-term massive explosion where it's going to affect the 2022 midterms,
No.
I don't really see that.
No, I don't either. And I think long-term, it's also creating the historical record, which is important. And you mentioned building the case, but the question is, which case? What case are they building? Where does this go? Where do you come down on the question of, should they make a criminal referral? Does that matter? Does this go to the Department of Justice? Are we talking about criminal liability for Donald Trump and his Confederates?
Goodness, that's a great question. I don't think a referral matters one way or the other. I think once there's more information sharing between Congress and the DOJ, I think you're going to see a more robust pattern, maybe of charges and indictments for certain individuals. The problem they're going to have is that, and I've seen this, is that how do you directly connect, President Trump to saying, I want this insurrection to happen? Does he really believe this? Is he going to blame his lawyers? Is he going to blame Eastman? How difficult is that for the DOJ when they have not only a Republican majority, but when they know the divisiveness and they're doing their own polling, and it looks like people want to move on from January 6th. And I hate to be so cold politically, but I think that's an issue for the DOJ, is that where are they at, right? We should be looking at facts and justice regardless of political wins. That's been my argument for a long time. And I would be very aggressive. But on the other hand, I'm not there looking at the data or the evidence, and I'm not an attorney. But I was a counterterrorism expert, Charlie. And I can tell you when I see something wrong, I know something's wrong, right? So there you go.
Well, as we're discussing something, it's a target-rich environment. It's not necessarily simply a matter of what did the president know and when did he know it, what did he believe, because, of course, we're dealing with the lizard mind of Donald Trump. There are so many other things involving potential wire fraud or, fraud, election misconduct. The other things involving what we do know on tape, the pressuring of state officials. I'm not a lawyer, so I don't know what the Department of Justice is looking at. I know that there are some difficulties if you have to prove what his state of mind was, which strikes me as kind of a nightmare, but there are others that might be more tangible. Okay, so I have to ask you about the craziness down in Texas and the fact that it's not an outlier. I mean, just to remind people, Denver, and you correct me if I misunderstand, you're an elected Republican congressman from Virginia, the 5th District. You preside over a same-sex marriage and a wedding, and all hell breaks loose. And after a very, very bizarre change in the rules in a caucus, you lose the renomination to a MAGA type. So when you read about what's going on in Texas, this is not an outlier. Some of the things that are happening down there, the radicalization, these are not just one-offs, are they? There's something really extraordinary is happening to the grassroots all over the country.
It is. And I don't know if it's a pride that I was the first one taken out that way, Charlie. But when you see what happened to Dan Crenshaw, when you see what their platform is at the Texas GOP, I remember I was in a brewery down, I think, in Halifax County, and I was giving a speech, and I was confronted by an individual who screamed at me, "You're the general of the sodomite armies," which was, I hadn't heard that one before. That was something. And I remember he was screaming at me, saying, that I was, I've been called a tool of the Antichrist and things of that nature, whatever he was, gibbering on about. And then I said, listen, where are you hearing these things? And I was getting pretty confrontational. He goes, I read about you all the time. I've read how you're funded by George Soros. And so I paused a second. I said, oh, you can read? And it got really bad after that.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So it got that's the thing that with Dan too, he just ignores that stuff. I mean, Dan's former military like me, and you understand when people are just, screaming. The issue is that when you combine that with Greitens, when you combine that with all these other sort of ads that are, guns, Christmas pictures, all that kind of stuff, there's an additive value to that, or an additive quality where individuals could act on it. And I think what you're seeing in the Texas GOP is you're seeing sort of the base mobilizing around that radicalizing message, and that should again concern people.
Well, I think one of the things that's catching people by surprise, and I mean over the last several months, is the way that it's all about the gays. It's all of things that had really, we kind of thought we had moved past, now is central to the culture war. And so you have the Texas Republican Party passing a resolution that declares homosexuality an abnormal lifestyle choice, which is really something for this particular decade. And I mean, it is almost like the Westboro Baptist Church is moving into the mainstream. And that's just kind of the warm up. I mean, they attacked their own Senator John Cornyn for working on gun safety legislation. They explicitly say that Joe Biden is an illegitimate president. They called for the repeal of the 1965 Voting Rights Act, this landmark civil rights piece of legislation. And this is just a warm up for what I said, what history may remember as the main event, talking about nullification and secession. This is one of the resolutions. Texas retains the right to secede from the United States, and the Texas legislature should be called upon to pass a referendum. Now, what I wrote this morning, Denver, was, okay, I understand that people are tempted to roll their eyes at the crazy, but this is the platform of the governing party of the nation's second largest state. And if you've been paying attention, you know how fast these crazy ideas become mainstream. You've lived it. And the Texas Republicans, may be, batshit crazy, but they're not alone. I mean, look at Arizona, look at Nevada, look at Virginia. And I'm telling you, I just think that whether the reality happens or not, which I'm not making a prediction, but this buzz about secession is going to continue to be a real thing. I'm trying to imagine if the Republicans lose the next presidential election, how that's going to ramp up, and it's going to take everybody by surprise. What do you think?
If it takes people by surprise, nobody's paying attention. People laughed at me about the Qanon resolutions, right. Charlie. I was by myself, man. Let me tell you. And December 10th, when I gave my farewell speech, I'm like, we got to be careful. And I remember coming off the floor and a couple of members saying, Denver, man, we don't think, these are just a bunch of crazy loons that are sitting in the corner. And by the way, Charlie, these are the same people that are appealing to those crazy loons sitting in the corner. So I do believe that violence is not only something we have to worry about. I think it's almost, when you're seeing what's going on around the country, I think we can absolutely say as a probable thing to happen is we're going to have violence on a level that's going to scare people. And notwithstanding January 6th, notwithstanding what you're seeing with shootings in schools or in malls, I think gosh darn it, Charlie, when you go back to what you just asked, which is such a great question, if we're not prepared for violence based on what's happening right now, we're not seeing the field. And when I talk about domestic terrorism, you look at the specific definitions, people can go crazy if they think they're somehow, part of the new 1776 returns movement. And that's what you're saying. We're saying that these people believe that America needs to return to its roots of revolution and that they have to fight this globalist takeover. And all of this is based on sort of this apocalyptic or great tribulation, or the fact that religiously they need to do it. And that's the issue you have. It's very hard for facts to break through to people who believe they're in a war for their very soul. And that's the thing that we have in front of us right now.
So later today, the Speaker of the Arizona House, Rusty Bowers, is going to be testifying. He's going to describe the pressure campaign from Trump, from Rudy Giuliani, and Virginia Thomas, the wife of Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas. And apparently Trump and Giuliani pushed Bowers to change Arizona's law retroactively to allow the legislature to choose a different slate of presidential electors than the ones picked by voters. Do you have any thoughts about this whole Ginni Thomas thing and where that's going?
I have thoughts. I have thoughts. I was the first one to see her text messages, beside Ginni and Mark Meadows himself, because our team was the one who broke out those text messages, and I attached the numbers to names. So that's really what we had to do. And the fact is, when I saw that, a couple of things. Number one, QAnon had infiltrated every level of the Republican Party. Number two, you had, at least tangentially, you had all three branches of government involved in text messages, which really bothered me. And the other thing, too, is she was bragging about her access to every level of government within the text messages. So for her, nobody should be surprised that she was emailing state governments to try to overturn the election. It just should be a surprise. And her belief system is skewed. And I don't know if there's some type of issue that she needs to address or what it is, but that belief system does suggest some mental problems. And I'm just not quite sure it just does suggest that. Was that too much? Too much?
No, this is not too much. I mean, you think about some of these crazy people that are around, and one of the interesting questions is why are there so many meetings with John Eastman? Why does Virginia Thomas have this kind of access? Why is Powell sitting in the White House? And the answer is always, well, either because Donald Trump himself wants them in these meetings, or in the case of Virginia Thomas, because she's Clarence Thomas's wife. I mean, not every nut job in Washington has this kind of access, and she does because of her name. Denver Riggleman, thank you so much for joining us on the podcast, and thank you for all of your efforts with the January 6th committee and going forward. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Charlie. You have a great day, buddy.
The Bulwark Podcast is produced by Katie Cooper with audio production by Jonathan Siri. I'm Charlie Sykes. Thank you for listening to today's Bulwark Podcast, and we'll be back tomorrow. We'll do this all over again.
There are about 1 million podcasts about money, but Bad with Money with Gabby Dunn is the one where finances meet social justice.
Investing in dating with Bella Gandhi.
Do you believe that people should pay for dating apps?
To me, invest in the dating process. There's nothing more important than finding the person you want to spend the rest of your life with. There's a stigma. Everything should be free. You're going to go to Whole Foods, meet eyes over mangoes, and all the dominoes fall in perfect order. That's just a load of garbage.
Bad with Money. Listen wherever you get your podcasts.